So welcome to another deep dive.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. Today we're heading over to South Africa.
Oh, South Africa.
Yep, their economy has been making some waves recently, and we're going to try and figure out why.
Interesting. I know they've had some challenges in the past.
For sure. But this article from Creek Book's business blog paints a very, very positive picture. It's called South Africa in the Spotlight, a Rising Economic Power. And it's from this month, November 2024. So really up to date. What caught my eye was just how much their economy has grown. Apparently, they've hit a GDP of $403 billion.
Wow, that's impressive.
Right. I mean, that makes them the biggest economy in Africa.
It really is a significant number.
Mm-hmm.
When you consider all the different economies across the African continent, for South Africa to come out on top like that really says something about the progress they've been making.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised to see that. I don't really have a great grasp of GDP numbers, though. Like, is that a lot compared to other countries around the world?
It puts them in a similar range as some pretty established economies. I mean, obviously, it's still quite a bit smaller than giants like the US and China, but it's definitely in the ballpark of some European countries, and definitely within Africa. It's significantly larger than the next closest, like Egypt with $380 billion and Algeria at $260 billion.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that's a pretty sizable lead then. So this article points to a few reasons for this growth. One that jumped out at me was this Government of National Unity, or GNU. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure, yeah. The GNU is basically a coalition government. It's formed by different political parties coming together.
Ah, so it's like a team effort.
Exactly. The idea is to try and bring stability and move past some of those political divisions that have maybe held the country back in the past.
Makes sense. So it's less about one party pushing their own agenda and more about finding ways to work together to actually move the country forward.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it seems like it's actually working. Since they formed the GNU, they've been able to put policies in place to attract foreign investment and make it easier to do business in South Africa.
Like what kind of policies?
Well, for example, they streamlined the process for getting business permits. They've also cut down on a lot of that red tape that can be a real headache for investors.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. Creating a friendlier environment for businesses to operate, both domestic and from overseas.
Exactly. And another thing the article talks about is the South African rand. It's been getting stronger recently.
Yeah, I saw that. I know a strong currency is usually a good thing, but honestly, I don't totally get why that is.
Sure. A strong currency usually shows that there's confidence in the economy. Basically, it means people are willing to put their money there. They believe it's going to hold its value, maybe even increase in value over time.
So it's kind of like a vote of confidence from, like, the global market.
Yeah, you could say that. And this confidence in South Africa is probably tied to the recent decision by the South African Reserve Bank to cut the repo rate.
The repo rate?
Right. The repo rate is the interest rate that commercial banks use to borrow money from the central bank.
Okay. And how does that affect the overall economy?
Well, think about it this way. When the repo rate is lower, it becomes cheaper for banks to borrow money. And then they can pass those savings on to businesses and individuals by offering cheaper loans.
Right, okay, that makes sense. So it's all connected then. Lower repo rate leads to easier borrowing, which leads to more spending and investing, and that fuels economic growth.
Yeah, exactly. And they're actually expecting even further cuts to the repo rate in the future, which tells investors that South Africa is serious about creating a good climate for growth.
That's really interesting. So they're not just like riding this current wave, they're proactively trying to keep it going.
Exactly. And it seems to be working. The article talks about a wave of new enterprises coming in.
Yeah, that caught my eye. What kind of investments are we talking about here?
It's a mix of domestic and foreign investment. So local entrepreneurs are seeing the same opportunities as international players, which is great. The article doesn't get into specifics about the companies or sectors, but it does mention growth in renewable energy, technology, and infrastructure.
I've been hearing more and more about South Africa's push toward renewable energy, which makes sense considering, the global push for sustainability.
Definitely. And it's not just good for the environment, it's a real economic opportunity too. South Africa has a lot of sunshine and wind, making it perfect for solar and wind power. So that attracts investment, creates jobs, and helps them move away from fossil fuels.
Wow, so many positives there. It sounds like South Africa really is hitting its stride with a stable government, a strong currency, low interest rates, and a surge in investment. But this article keeps mentioning South Africa's potential. What exactly does that mean? What would it take for them to really reach their full potential?
That's the million-dollar question. They've made incredible progress, but there are still some hurdles to overcome. The article specifically mentions COVID recovery and something called load shedding.
Load shedding. I've heard that term before, but I'm not really sure what it means.
Basically, it's rolling blackouts.
Blackouts.
Yeah, it's when they have to intentionally shut off power to certain areas to prevent the whole grid from collapsing. It's because the demand for electricity is higher than what they can actually supply.
Oh, I see. So it's like a power shortage issue.
Yeah.
I can see how that would be a problem, especially for businesses trying to operate and attract investment.
Yeah, it's a major roadblock. And it's caused by a bunch of things. Aging infrastructure, not enough investment in new power plants, and even some corruption in the energy sector.
So tackling this power problem is going to be key for South Africa's continued economic growth.
Definitely. They have a lot going for them, but yeah, this power issue could hold them back.
It really makes you think, though, Like, what happens if South Africa actually does overcome these challenges? If they manage to reach their full potential, what could that even look like?
That's what really got me thinking, too. The article mentioned South Africa possibly becoming like a leading economy in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Is that even realistic?
Yeah.
And what kind of impact could that have on a global scale?
Well, predicting the future is always a bit of a gamble.
For sure.
But it is interesting to consider what a powerful South African economy could mean for the world. First off, it would definitely shift the balance of power. Right now, the main economic players are pretty much concentrated in North America, Europe, and Asia.
Right.
But a rising Africa, with South Africa leading the charge, that could really shake things up.
So we're talking like instead of a few economic superpowers calling the shots, it could become a more multipolar world. Exactly. We could see new trade partnerships, different investment flows, even new geopolitical alliances. Imagine like Africa not just being seen as a place that needs aid, but as a major player in global decisions, like helping to shape the rules of the game.
That's a pretty big shift. What kind of changes could we actually see in the world if that were to happen? Would it affect things like global supply chains or even how international organizations work?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, South Africa already has a place at the table in groups like the G20, the group of the world's largest economies.
Right.
But if their economy keeps growing, they'll have even more influence. They could push for policies that help not just them, but other developing nations as well. We might see different priorities too, more focus on issues that are important to the global South. Things like sustainable development, access to technology, fair trade practices.
So it wouldn't just be about South Africa getting ahead, but about making the whole global system fairer. A system where more voices are heard, where different perspectives are taken seriously.
Precisely. It's about understanding that in this globalized world, we're all connected, and what happens in one place can have positive effects everywhere.
That's a pretty exciting idea. But let's bring it back to South Africa for a minute. We were talking about the challenges they're facing, the COVID recovery, and that load shedding problem. Just how big of a deal are those issues? And what needs to happen to fix them?
Oh, they're definitely not small issues. I mean, the pandemic hit everyone hard, and South Africa's no exception. It's going to take some serious investment in healthcare, social safety nets, and economic stimulus to get back on track. And then you have load shedding, which, as we said, comes from those deeper problems in their energy system.
Right.
To fix that, they'll need to spend a lot of money to update the power grid, increase their ability to generate electricity, and find more diverse sources of energy.
We talked about renewable energy earlier. Would that be a big part of the solution?
Oh, absolutely. Investing in things like solar and wind power could really change the game. Not only does it help them rely less on fossil fuels, which is good for the environment, but it also creates jobs, brings in investment, and makes their energy supply more secure in the long run.
It really sounds like they're at a crucial point. They've got so much going for them, but these challenges could really derail everything if they don't address them the right way.
Yeah, I agree. The decisions they make now, the policies they put in place, the investments they prioritize, all of that will determine whether they can actually transform their economy and achieve that leading economy status the article talks about.
It's interesting to think about how all those factors, both within South Africa and internationally, are going to play out. But I noticed the article didn't really talk about the social impact of all this potential economic growth. Is everyone in South Africa benefiting from this boom?
Right.
Or are there still a lot of inequalities that need to be addressed?
That's a really important point, and unfortunately the article didn't get into that too much. But you're right, economic growth doesn't always mean everyone benefits equally. South Africa still struggles with things like poverty, inequality, and unemployment. So it's really important that as their economy grows, those benefits are shared fairly, and that they put policies in place to help those who have been, historically disadvantaged.
So it's not just about increasing GDP and attracting foreign investment. They need to focus on social development too, creating opportunities for all South Africans and making sure that everyone has a chance to share in this economic success.
Exactly. Sustainable and equitable growth, that's what they need. An approach that considers both the economy and social factors. It's about creating an environment where everyone can thrive, not just a select few.
Sounds like South Africa is walking a bit of a tightrope. They need to tackle these social challenges while still keeping that economic momentum going. So what are some of the key things to watch for as this story develops?
I think it's important to see how the government handles those issues of inequality and social mobility. Are they actually putting policies in place that promote inclusive growth? Are they investing in education, healthcare, job training programs? And are those programs helping everyone in society?
What about the political situation? We talked about that government of national unity before. How stable is that coalition? And how might that affect their ability to implement these long-term policies?
Yeah, that's another crucial factor. Coalition governments by nature can be kind of fragile. So maintaining unity and consensus within the GNU, that's going to be critical for their success. And it's important to keep an eye on how they deal with things like corruption and accountability, because those issues can undermine progress and erode public trust.
So we're dealing with a pretty complex story here with a lot of different factors at play. The economic signs are definitely promising, but those underlying challenges are very real and they can't be ignored. So where do we go from here with this deep dive? It really does feel like South Africa is at a turning point, like so much potential, but with some serious roadblocks in the way too.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story to follow for sure. And it makes you wonder, how things will play out, not just for them, but for everyone else too.
That's what I was thinking. Like, it's easy to get wrapped up in the big picture, the idea of global power shifting and everything. But what does all this actually mean for, the average person? Why should someone who maybe doesn't have any direct connection to South Africa even care about what's happening there?
That's a great question. And it's easy to get lost in all the talk about GDP and global influence and all that. But at the end of the day, it really is about people. And even if you live thousands of miles away from South Africa, what happens there can actually have an impact on your life in ways you might not expect.
Really? Like, how so?
Well, for example, think about this. If South Africa's economy gets stronger, that means people in South Africa have more money to spend.
Right.
And that translates into more demand for goods and services, not just within South Africa, but from other countries as well, which could mean new markets opening up and new opportunities for businesses all over the world.
Ah, so what you're saying is a rising tide in South Africa could lift boats in other parts of the world too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the economics either. A strong South Africa could become a much more influential voice on the world stage. They could advocate for things like fighting climate change, reducing poverty, promoting sustainable development, issues that affect everyone, really.
It really shows how interconnected we all are, doesn't it?
It does. What happens in one part of the world can really have an impact on the rest of us. We all have a responsibility to try to create a better future for everyone.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm feeling, cautiously optimistic, I guess. It's great to see the progress South Africa's making, but it's clear they've still got a tough road ahead. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with? What should they take away from all this?
I think the most important thing is to really try to understand the nuances of the situation. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines, the excitement about economic booms and all that. But you have to look deeper, understand the challenges, the complexities. Remember that there are real people behind all those statistics.
It's a good reminder that the world is full of these incredible stories, stories of progress and struggle, of hope and uncertainty. And we need to keep learning, keep asking questions, keep exploring these stories with open minds.
I agree. The more we understand about the world, the better equipped we'll be to face the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities that come our way, and to work together to create a future that benefits everyone.
I love that. It's like, even though our deep dive is ending, the conversation doesn't have to stop there. So to everyone listening, thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep diving deep,